All right, welcome back to our third episode on our favorite picks for this year's draft. We're bringing you guys some hot late round picks that you guys can use to, really fill out that fantasy roster. Maybe grab some guys who can help you win a league. Develop into that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, or that sneaky running back. Or as you'll see for one of Frankie's picks, just take up a bench spot and probably get dropped at some point. Before we launch into the show and the news and everything, Frankie, you want to show off the beer you brought us today?
I went with a local beer here, Harpoon Rec League. Nice little crusher.
I always forget that Harpoon's local.
Yep. They just say Boston on the can. But it's a nice little summer crusher. Easily drinkable. Tried to avoid the hot profile for Vitali over there.
Yeah, because I feel like everything you're like, hey, this is just a can of hops, but it's a summer crusher. I'm like, this is more appropriate to a summer crusher if you're somebody who likes the IPAs. As the not IPA guy, I give this a pass. If it's given to me for free, I will not complain.
I just want to throw this out there because we've been drinking, especially on Frankie weeks, we've been drinking a lot of summer crushers this year. I swear to God, if when the winter rolls around, we just drink nothing but like stouts and porters for like 4 months straight, I'm gonna throw myself out a window. I like a good stout or a good heavy beer every now and again, but if I'm drinking bread for 8 months straight,
what if he just goes the other route with it and just nothing but summer crushers year round?
This is a nice summer crushers. If you're living in one of those days, it doesn't get winter. Not like us up here, as it's like 3 feet of snow outside.
Oh, wait until my next choice. I'm gonna bring a nice little spooky surprise.
If it's a pumpkin beer, I will drink none of it. I'll stare at you as it just sits here and warms on the table. All right, let's do some news before we get into today's show. Kenyon Drake walking boot was seen in a walking boot today. It's called precautionary. Cliff Kingsbury said it was just for some camp soreness. It doesn't change my valuation of Kenyon Drake at all, honestly. Especially if it's just for soreness, like whatever. He'll be fine. He's still going to go in the same spot in drafts for me right now. If it turns from soreness to something else, we'll circle back around to that.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency there, especially with the whole non-answer as to why.
Yeah, especially because 2 news items down, we're going to get to like the least transparency ever.
Yeah.
Brandin Ayuk hurt hammy, no word on how serious it is, but that's not great for the 49ers because they're now missing Deebo Samuel, Jalen Hurt, and Brandin Ayuk. So hopefully he gets back to, playing for them because they kind of need people to catch the football that aren't named George Kittle. I think their top receiving option now with him on the shelf is like Trent Taylor.
I heard Des Bryant is a free agent.
Sure. He's better. He's probably better than Trent Taylor at this point in his career. And then with the clarity of mud, Deontay Johnson has missed his 5th straight day of practice with a calf injury. If they're not really talking about what it is or how serious it is, it's just he's missed 5 days of practice with probably a calf. I don't know. Steelers, if you can give us anything to go on, that would be swell. Mike Williams, week to week with a shoulder sprain. He was going in the 7th. He's probably not going anywhere now because I don't know if you want Mike Williams with a week-to-week shoulder sprain with Tyrod Taylor throwing him the football. Just let him go undrafted, and maybe when he gets healthy, throw some fab at him.
Yeah, real sad about that one. I've always been one of the perennial Mike Williams owners, and I was waiting for him to flourish, and then Phillip Rivers left, and they replaced him with Tyrod Taylor. So, I was hoping maybe for some reason Tyrod likes him better, but I'm holding out much hope.
His stock is going to zero. He is going to become worthless. Mike Williams will file for bankruptcy. Lamar Jackson, back at practice following a groin injury. Good to hear because obviously NFL MVP last season, fantasy darling. You want him to be ready to go, especially with how high he's going in drafts. So glad to see that he's not really being hampered by this, and that was probably just some minor camp soreness, a day off for a guy who can afford to take a day off. And Dallas Goedert back at practice after suffering a hairline fracture in his thumb, which I'm told are critical to catching footballs.
I had to believe so. I don't like that going in unless you're somebody who's in on the Ertz train, which I've been on and off with
This
that
makes me
bus.
more interested in Ertz.
Yeah,
I'm probably still not going to draft him because he's going too early, but I'm more interested now than I was 3 days ago.
It makes me more interested in my guy, who is coming up later.
Yeah, it is kind of funny that we talked about the Eagles and how they can be great for fantasy, but their Achilles heel is
healthy.
If they could just stay healthy,
Everyone's hurt.
Yeah, we're only a few months and weeks into camp now, and
It's August 24th. Everyone's hurt.
Yep. Maybe they're just getting their way out of the way for it. They just all took tack hammers. And
It looks like last year already, except they have Jalen Reagor there now. Like, hooray, it's Jalen Reagor and then Greg Ward. Dallas Goedert, please stay healthy. We need Carson Wentz to do something, anything. Maybe they'll still win the division, though, this year, and, beat out those perennially bad Cowboys.
I do have Carson Wentz in a couple of best ball leagues, so I really would appreciate if he did something.
Before we launch into the show, I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on this as we really, because we're really hitting draft season right now. This is when most leagues are going to start. Either you start looking at information, or when a lot of drafts start happening is end of August, beginning of September. So I wanted to take this moment to pick you guys' brains. If you had to pick it, who are your fantasy flop and fantasy darling for this season? And we're picking team here. Every year it seems like there's I guess we'll call it a dark horse or a darling, where they kind of come out of nowhere, or they were very underdrafted and they blow everyone's expectations out of the water. And then, last year it was the Browns, but every year it seems like there's a flop where everyone's like, let's go, hype train, full steam. It left the station years ago, and it completely derails and drives off a cliff like one of those old-timey movies.
Yeah, it's always one thing you try and look for, but, last year with one of the darlings being the Titans, everyone was in and ready for Derrick Henry, but no one saw A.J. Brown having the year he did, or Tannehill being the quarterback he was and how efficient he was.
Well, and to be fair, everyone had been in on Derrick Henry for 4 years at that point,
so was waiting for it.
Yeah, it was just the simmering hype for him at that point.
But then again, I feel like with the Titans running backs, you're always in on them. You're just waiting for them to pop, and then they keep putting some old vet.
Huge.
It's like I got Derrick Henry in the 4th round last year.
Yeah,
he reminded me of Kenyon Drake, because every year it was like, this is the year!
Yeah, it was just the same thing with Bishop Sankey before him.
Except he never turned into anything.
I will bring up Bishop Sankey as much as I can, but
what a name.
No. No, and that's a great transition for me, because my fantasy flop this year is the Titans. Because I feel like they caught lightning in a bottle. Everything kind of gelled. They were able to just absolutely destroy the Rock with Derrick Henry, who I think still will be good. But it's going to be like the Browns last year, where Derrick Henry will hold on to dear life as that train goes off the cliff, and he comes in as a low-end RB1.
O'Doyle rules right over the side.
Yeah, he's gonna be that running back one where you're like, I guess he was a running back one. He's gonna
like David Johnson a few years ago.
Yeah, he's gonna be David Johnson because he's not gonna get the reception work. We know this. He's gonna have to. He's either gonna have to carry this team on his back like he did last year, which I doubt it's gonna happen without injuries. I don't see AJ Brown reproducing, and it's just when I look at everything together, I just see them as easily underperforming their ADP and where they're going, and it seems like everyone's in on the Titans this year, who they forget it. One runs some of the least amount of plays per game and try to win every game 7-3.
Yep,
and that's not good for fantasy production.
And what team is your fantasy dark horse?
I was between a few. Browns were interesting, but I decided to, with all the good news coming out of camp, I actually went with the Patriots. I don't think they're
not a homer pick at all.
Yes, like I said, I'm going to temper expectations because I'm not saying that the Patriots themselves are going to be Super Bowl champions again. I think their ceiling, as far as actual NFL, is like one and done in the playoffs. But as far as fantasy, you start looking at the pieces on that team, and you can see where some guys can really climb up their value. Cam Newton, he's a former MVP, and we know the value of running quarterbacks. Damian Harris has been lighting it up in camp, and it seems like he's going to just be the starter when this is all over. N'Keal Harry, 2 touchdowns today that everyone was glowing about.
Yep.
So he's got a rapport with a quarterback who knows how to use big body receivers. I can see all 3 of those guys. And even Asiasi, the new tight end that he just drafted, having some sneaky value maybe in DFS. I just see 4 weapons there. They're all going criminally low. That if you grab 1 or 2 of them on your team, you won't be mad at the end of the year.
Frankie, what about you?
Well, just a point to Vitale, there's a little bit of support there. Cam, I think I'm not putting him on the moon, but in years where he's played a full season, never finished below the QB5. It's a fun little fact right there.
Sure.
As far as we'll call it a bust or a flop. I think the Bucks. I'm not super high on them. I mean, even with the news out of camp that Mike Evans and Tom Brady are working well together, I'm still not completely sold on Mike Evans. In games he's played last year, he did score 0 points. Whether that is credit to him or Jameis Winston, I will play the fifth on, but I think that only one weapon is going to flourish in that offense, whether it be Evans or Godwin. I don't think that they're capable of putting out the same performance they did last year because Brady just doesn't throw the ball as much as Jameis Winston did. I think they're going to be up more in games, so they're not going to want to throw the ball as much.
Sure.
So, as I've said before, one weapon, whether it's Godwin or Evans. Also, they're just going a little bit high for me. I think if they were in the third and fourth round, I would be a little bit more sold, but
Yeah, they're second and third.
price is too high.
Second and third, Gronk's a 10th, Brady's a 9th.
I think Gronk being a 10th is just...
Rojo's been climbing.
Yeah,
He's in like the, 8th, 9th now?
Yeah, 8th round. And what about your fantasy dark horse? Who do you think is going to be that sleeper one?
I'm riding the hype train into the sunset. I am taking the Cardinals all day there.
So you're picking the groupthink fantasy darling and just riding off into the sunset.
Yep, I am 100% sold on those Cardinals.
I can't blame you.
I like
It's a fun hype train to be on.
I mean, I like the confidence of Kyler. I mean, he said his top 3 receivers could all possibly go over 1,000 yards. I mean, even if they don't, I mean, you gotta like that confidence, right?
Kenyon Drake tweeted out that tweet over the weekend of the face you make when you win a fantasy championship, and it's just him smiling, you know.
Yeah, like I said, you guys can just be great on that train, just chugging along as you look down the canyons. Like, wait, is that the Browns train? And then just, like I said, they were very close to being my bust for this year, but I think enough of their players will maintain ADP that they technically won't be a flop. But I'm not excited to get Cardinals this year.
All right, well, let's launch into the main part of the show here. So as a reminder to everyone who's joined us on these last 2 episodes, or as a introduction for anyone who's just joining us now, and if you are just joining us now, go back and watch the last 2 episodes. This series is to give our viewers some ideas about who our personal favorite picks are in the different segments of the draft. So this one is going to be 9th and later. These aren't necessarily guys that are specifically great values. They're just players that we really want to hyper target in all formats this season. We think that they're, for lack of a better word, league winners. People who are going to be very good for your fantasy season. So we've each prepared 2 players for you. Vitaly, why don't you take us away with your first player today?
Sure. I'm going to go with a quarterback, guy going late that has been a fantasy darling for some time and now is getting a little too much shade, and I love his price. Not only that, I love his upside. That's Mr. Big Ben Roethlisberger. Last year, obviously, only played a couple of games before he went out and had to get Tommy John surgery, typically a pitcher's surgery. But coming back, he is a guy who is coming off of the last full season he played was the QB3. And he's on a team that regularly likes to throw the ball about 600 times. We know his ups and downs, but it's now that you have information on it, you can see them coming where you can play him at home, sit him away. And he's in that range where you can get him as a streaming option and grab another, maybe safer quarterback, maybe grab a Stafford and then a Big Ben. When I look at just all the reasons why, he has great weapons around him. He's got a running game. He's got a defense that is there to support him. So if James Conner goes down, as we know he is a little injury prone, and they have to lean on the known commodity that is Big Ben, we could easily see him getting back up to 600 again. And another reason I'm liking him, the more I look into him, is he's got a really nice schedule to start. Even though he's starting on the road, he's starting against the Giants, who, as a defense, I'm not scared of.
Yeah.
Of his first 6 games, he has 4 at home, and one of his away games is the Giants. I think that's great value for a guy you could pick up early stream him and then start playing him away as he starts hitting his tougher matchups like Week 7 against Baltimore.
Well, and if you're looking at streaming guys too, especially if you're looking at getting a streaming guy in the draft, it is important to factor in their early season schedule because you don't want to grab someone like Danny Dimes if you're looking to stream, coming out of the gates, because you're just going to have to pick up someone else immediately after that because he's got a terrible early season schedule. So that is a little bit of a feather in Big Ben's cap that he has that soft schedule out of the gates.
Yeah, and because right now he's going as the quarterback 18, if he flops, if he gets injured, he's not killing your season like if you draft a higher quarterback like a Dak, Lamar, or somebody. If they get hurt, you're potentially out of, second through fifth round pick. For him, you're getting him in late double-digit rounds, and for that value, for the upside of, he could easily be a QB5 and no one would be surprised about it. So for all those reasons, it's just I'm ready to buy in on him and a lot of the other Steelers players this year for their depressed value. Depressed.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to go against that there. I really do like Big Ben's, I guess, upside, if you call it that, just because he has been a very solid fantasy quarterback as recently as 2 years ago. I think the injuries scares people off him a little bit, and the fact that he's not known as the safest of quarterbacks with the football, he does tend to throw some picks. But yeah, if you cherry pick the matchups, if you start him at home and sit him on the road, which has sort of been the Big Ben trend, he can win you a lot of games, and you don't got to pay very much for him. If anything, you could take him with literally your last pick in some drafts. Yeah. Frankie, what about you? Who's your first guy?
Well, this is going to be a guy that you actually mentioned, not being the guy that you want to start in the first couple weeks, and that is Mr. Danny Dimes. He's going at ADP 141, QB 14 off boards. Last year, had a decent year, 3,000 passing yards, 24 TDs, 12 picks.
It's a pretty good year for a rookie.
Obviously not the most flashy stat line, but for a rookie, that's not bad. I would take that. Compared to Josh Allen, who's going 4 rounds ahead of him, actually, I think even more. Josh Allen didn't really do much more. He only threw 60 more yards, threw less TDs, a couple less picks. But, as far as, getting him where you're getting him, Danny Dimes, you probably don't want him to start your season.
Wait, but how did their fumbling match up?
That is a problem that needs to be addressed. Obviously, those rookie growing pains, but I think that can easily be fixed. Assuming Saquon stays healthy, he's not keeping the ball on the ground as much. He's ideally not keeping the ball at all. Throwing it to his, again, not the most flashy receivers. Throwing Shepard, Darius Slayton, Golden Tate, but those are definitely guys who are capable of catching the football, looking in better shape than the Eagles are. But I think that
there are high school teams looking better than the Eagles are.
I think that if he's, you drafted a little bit earlier of a quarterback for the first couple weeks, maybe draft somebody even not later, but around the same range who has a better schedule to start the season and pick him up. Because at the end of the season, he has...
would you say Big Ben?
So in the middle of the season, he has Washington, the Eagles, the Bucks, Washington, the Eagles, a bye week, Cincinnati. Now, I think that's a pretty juicy matchup for quarterbacks.
Yeah, I'm not very excited about the bye week, but the other ones catch my eye a little bit.
Hey, you can't fumble on a bye week.
True. You can't score which, as we've seen with Jared Goff, negative points is something you have to be concerned about with your quarterback on occasion.
He does have Seattle in there to end out the regular season, but then for the playoffs, he does have also the Cardinals and the Browns, the Ravens in the championship week, which is not ideal, but what can you do? No one's perfect.
Yeah, and by that point, we don't know what defense could be like with the Bears last year. They started out so hot, and they were a must-avoid, even for some of your lower-end studs. But I do love that middle pack right there, and Danny Dimes is a guy I'm fine with buying in on the late guy. He's a guy I could see myself getting and pairing with Big Ben, and just basically playing them back-to-back. And if I'm going for one of these later guys, I'm planning on taking a second quarterback who has a complimentary schedule or has complimentary upside. So that way if I have to cut one, if Danny Dimes goes back to his fumbling ways, then I can just cut him. My team's not that hurt.
Or if it turns out he's not that good, because that was the gripe going into last year, was who the hell is this Danny Dimes guy?
Yeah, like I said, I love the tools. I love that he has. You say it's not that flashy, but honestly, it's a solid core. Like there's no elite players in that other than Saquon. But
I would say he probably has the best running back in the NFL.
Yeah, I was gonna say more in his receiving core, but he works out of the backfield. But
I mean, I would make the case that you could say Evan Ingram is an elite pass catching tight end.
I didn't even bring up Evan Ingram. That is.
Evan Ingram's a very good. His one fantasy bugaboo has been injury, but when Evan Ingram's been on the field, he's been a very, very good pass catching option for that Giants team, regardless of who's under center.
Yeah, the problem with Evan Ingram has always just been we're trying to recapture that rookie season where he flashed, and it's just injury is what we hope is what's been hampering him, not that it was a fluke, which I don't believe. I think this is another good year to grab Ingram. Yeah, but I just agree. I think Danny's a great pick for late round teams.
What about you, Ian? What are you thinking here?
I'm going to lead off with a tight end here, a guy that I started the year very hot on, got a little lukewarm on, and now as the pendulum swings, I'm back to hot. But it's also been, news has been coming back out of camp about this guy, Hayden Hurst. He's someone who should be a very involved part of that Falcons team. I mean, the guy's 6'4", 245. He's 27, so he doesn't need to grow into his body at all. He's already there. Matt Ryan has called him one of the fastest and most athletic tight ends he's ever played with, and he's played with Austin Hooper and Tony Gonzalez. Austin Hooper's probably never going to go into Canton, but he's a pretty good tight end, and Tony was all right. He was actually compared to Zach Ertz coming out of the draft in 2018, and the Ravens thought highly enough of him that they took him with the 25th overall pick. The only reason he's not still on the Ravens was because they have a guy named Mark Andrews who, to his credit, played very well. And the Ravens just kind of didn't need him. Hurst saw the writing on the wall. He asked for a trade to a team that would use him a little bit more. The Ravens wanted to recoup value because they obviously used a first on him, but they got what they were looking for out of Mark Andrews, and they have Nick Boyle as more of a secondary / blocking tight end. They didn't need 3 tight ends. So they moved him to the Falcons, who were willing to pay a second and a fifth for him in this year's draft. So that was 2020 draft picks. They got a second and a fifth for him. They had to give away a fourth in Hayden Hurst. So pretty good draft haul. And last time I checked, teams don't typically, give up that kind of draft capital for a player they don't plan on using. So that speaks to how highly the Falcons clearly think of this kid. They clearly view him like he's able to be an integral part of their offense. And given that he wasn't really drafted as a blocking tight end, he was described when he was coming out of the draft as not being a blocker. That was part of his scouting profile, was not a blocker, but a very natural pass catcher when he was coming into the league. I kind of doubt they picked him up to shore up their offensive line. There's a lot of vacated targets over there, what with Mohamed Sanu leaving and Austin Hooper leaving, and it just kind of being Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones now. Obviously, some of those are going to go to Todd Gurley, but their running backs last year did have target share of their own, and he's probably going to absorb those first. I can't see them giving a ton more of all those vacated targets to Todd Gurley, and they're historically a team that's heavily used their tight end position. I mean, over the last 10 years, they've averaged 122 targets to the tight end position. So, they've given a heavy target share to tight ends as a whole. The only years they really didn't was when they had literally no one back there. When they had Jacob Tamme starting as tight end. And I can't really blame them. I wouldn't want to throw to Jacob Tamme. He's not that good. Sorry, Jacob Tamme, if you're listening, but
I don't even know who Jacob Tamme is.
Exactly. But those were the down years for that offense for when they were if you're looking at the target volume to tight ends over that 10-year span. The down years are when they had Jacob Tamme or a freshly drafted Austin Hooper. But when Austin Hooper was involved in the offense, or when it was Tony Gonzalez, they were always at or over 100 receptions to the tight end position. I'll take that for a guy going at tight end 12 and an ADP of 120. I mean, that's a 10th round average, more or less. Actually, 11th round average, excuse me. So that's an 11th round average. So even if he doesn't pay out, it's a pretty low investment that you're getting him at. And he's a guy who's been described as an athletic freak. The team picked him up with a high amount of draft picks, so they paid out the nose to get him. And they have a lot of targets that they need to fill somewhere. He's probably going to step into a lot of those. Looking at Hayden Hurst, the only way he doesn't pan out is if he's just not the tight end that everyone thinks he is. I don't think it's the system that's going to fail him. I think he has to fail the system if he doesn't end up succeeding for fantasy owners this season.
Yes, Vitaly, just in case you're not tracking, the pendulum has swung to Hayden Hurst.
Yeah,
but no, I do agree with pretty much everything you said. I mean, the Falcons would have been my darling team to pick, but I think that they're going right about where they are value. I mean, Julio I think is going to outperform his ADP, but everybody else is pretty much where I want them. But no, I think that all your points are pretty solid. I think those targets do have to go somewhere, and I don't think Todd Gurley is going to take all of them. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say.
And we've talked about tight ends being a
Yeah, I mean, I'm still off the Hurst train. His value is getting to the point where I would consider drafting him, but like you said, with the usage, and you want to talk about Tammy, as when we were in Vegas and we were talking about this quite extensively, I went back and I had to do the research, and Matt Ryan's best year when he won the MVP, Jacob Tammy was on that team, and he got about 30 targets. So when you go with the 10-year sample, you're getting 2 years of the greatest tight end ever play in T-Gon's, and you're also including Hooper's great year. So for me, I look at the chasm that was the other ones, which I do believe Hooper is a better one, and I think they clearly paid for Hurst. He's a guy where I wouldn't be so shocked if he paid out value, but he's one of those ones I'll let him succeed on somebody else's team kind of thing.
Good. Less competition for me to get him. Vitaly, take us away with your next guy.
All right. So, to mix it up and change topics, I'm going to go with, once again, the Steelers and Deontay Johnson, who luckily, due to probably the injury and just the natural fluctuation of ADP, has slipped back into those later rounds, just into the 9th now. He's a guy whose his current ADP is putting him at the wide receiver 43, and I think it's criminal that people are letting the number 2, who's taking over the Antonio Brown role in that
Antonio
Brown's role in that offense is the X receiver and moving Juju back to his natural spot in the slot. We've seen Big Ben easily produce elite numbers at both positions and even be able to carry 3 wide receivers. So a guy who's moving in there with a team that should continue to throw, even if they take a step back into the 550 ranges, I'm still interested. And with how bad they were last year, he's going as the 43. Last year, he finishes the 43 with Duck Hodges throwing ducks to him, and how putrid that offense was. I mean, he was a rookie last year, and he still put up, 5 touchdowns, over 600 yards. So I can only see him going further with a Hall of Fame quarterback, another year in the system, and we know that wide receivers have a breakout year of 2 and 3. He is a little bit on the older side, so I mean, you like to see the younger breakout guys, but I can't see a reason why he's not going to return value in the 9th or even the 8th. When you have a quarterback who's going to throw it as much as he has, the production that he's been putting out, and Juju moving back to his natural position, like the two of them together, the only thing I can see people having a knock on this kid for is his ADP was climbing for a while, and I saw him going in the 7th, which starts to lose the value, but he's going to draw top coverage because most of the time your top corner's not moving into the slot to cover a guy, but they're going to probably just leave one corner on him, and if you've got a guy who's like a Richard Sherman who only plays one side of the field, they can easily scheme away from him. So all these together, and how much the coaches are just glowing about this kid, I'm all in on Deontay Johnson this year, just because it's a low buy-in with a easy wide receiver 2, maybe high wide receiver 2 ceiling. And once again, it's another one thing. He's in the late round. If he busts out, you should already have 3 wide receivers by this point, and hopefully he's your flex or your bench guy. And just as a little addendum on top of that, as I was researching Deontay, I completely forgot that James Washington was actually the reception leader for this team. So he's a guy who's going almost undrafted. If you don't believe in Deontay, if you don't believe in Juju, buy James Washington for free, and you might have a guy who has some sneaky value.
I was just about to ask about him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I'm on Team Deontay. I really don't have much else to say. You hit all the points I was gonna bring up with that.
Yeah, he's someone who if he goes high, not interested. If he goes where he's going, sure, I could buy him.
I also own him in a lot of best ball, so that might be contributing my unbiased opinion.
So you're in take jail.
Yes, I am. Unfortunately.
Frank, who you got? Who's your second guy?
Well, you're not a fan of him. We already talked about this a little bit before the show.
Aaron Jones. You know he's not a late round guy, right?
No, it's Mr. D-Jax.
Listen, if you kidnap all the rest of your league mates' children and hold them at gunpoint if they don't let Aaron Jones fall into the ninth, he's a late round guy.
No, D-Jax. I mean, I don't understand it. I mean, I guess I kind of understand it a little bit. He's the wide receiver 1 in Philly. He may not be the guy who's getting the most targets, but he's gonna be getting something. We may think that we know what we're gonna get with D-Jax.
Yeah, I mean, a 13-year sample size is pretty small. I need to see at least 13 more years before I know what he's going to give me.
I'm not saying he's going to go back to 1,000, 1,100-yard D-Jax. But, I mean, his touchdowns have never really been what's been selling him. It's been that yardage. It's been, a couple touchdowns, averaging 3 to 4 a year. So you're not really going to get that huge boom guy. You're going to get 600 to 700 yards maybe if he plays a full season, which I think is the biggest knock on him, and it's the injuries. But, I mean, if you look at all the other Eagles receivers, they're all injured. He's healthy, right? So, if everybody else is injured...
For now.
If everybody else is injured and he's healthy, I see a path for him to be that 700-yard, 4 or 5 touchdown guy. I'm not saying that he's going to blow up and be your starter, might be your wide receiver 1, but, maybe... he gets a good matchup. He's your flex.
I hate that pick more than words can say. You are if you're drafting Deshaun Jackson, you're drafting him to release him or hold a bench spot hostage for the season. Because, as Frankie put it, he's not going to get 1,000 yards. It's not going to happen. He's no longer that receiver. He is going into his 14th season in the NFL. And he's a speedster. He hasn't fallen off yet, or at least like the skills haven't. But it could literally be any day now. I mean, he's already outlived the average lifespan of his style of receiver. We know what we're getting, so the ceiling is low with him. And with the range that he's going, he is just a boring, blasé, white bread, unflavored rice option. I'd rather just not draft someone. I mean, you're taking him instead of guys like Anthony Miller or Preston Williams or another guy who's also injury-plagued on his team, Alshon Jeffrey, who you can just draft and stash on the IR until he's ready to play, and then once he's ready to play, you pull him off the IR, and you now have a guy with top 24 upside who gets 30% of Carson Wentz's targets. Why would you take him ever? Just let someone else take this time bomb, or hopefully no one takes him and he rots on the waiver wire, because this player is dead for fantasy owners. If you draft him, he's going to go off on your bench once, and you're going to be like, oh, I should use Deshaun Jackson more, and then you're going to put him in your lineup and get 2 catches for 17 yards, and you're going to throw your laptop off an overpass.
I will say, just to the point about the IR, if you draft Alshon, put him on your IR, and he doesn't play, you wasted that draft pick, and you have somebody on your IR.
I'd rather waste my draft pick and have someone on my IR than waste my draft pick and have someone on my bench.
Well, it sounds like Ian's not in favor of that pick. I did try and look in to see where the value is, because he's going, his ADP right now is 160, so he's basically free. He's waiver fodder, as Ian likes to say. It's hard for me to buy in just because his opening schedule's not great. I mean, it's conducive to if you want to try and predict the booms, because he's got Washington, then he's got the Rams. And, he's probably the one drawing the top coverage there, because I don't think Rager is going to be the clear one by that time. Then he goes to Cincy, then he's back to San Fran. And it's he's bouncing between these, and you got to hope that you're catching the good matchup on those ones. I am in on Deshaun Jackson for best ball redraft. I think there's too many other guys that I want to start in my flex. or just my wide receiver 3 position, if I'm putting a running back there, that trying to predict the 20-point game where he runs 170 yards down the field is going to be tough. I do see what you're saying, though, about the lack of people there, but we know that's only going to be at the beginning of the season. And Alshon's coming back. Once Alshon's back, it's going to be Alshon and Rager and the 2 tight ends, Miles Sanders. It's like I said, there's a lot of target. They throw a lot, but there's also a lot of mouths to feed in that offense.
We're also forgetting that they have 2 tight ends that they like a lot. Like, he may be the wide receiver one. He is not the pass catcher one. That's Zach Ertz. And you could argue that Dallas Goedert is the pass catcher too. So, at best, you could be getting a guy who's number 4 in his own system if you assume that they like Jalen Reagor more than Deshaun Jackson. I am with you though. I don't mind him in best ball with where he's going, because in best ball you don't have to call your shot. You just get his good week. So I'm fine with him in best ball. In redraft, he's a poison pill. Don't touch him.
I don't know. I think that it's like, you guys keep saying you need to predict the boom weeks, but if I'm drafting a guy who's going undrafted in some formats, he's not the guy that I'm predicting the boom weeks. He's a guy who, if he's doing well, I might slot him into that flex slot, but otherwise he's going to be on my bench.
Right, so he's a wasted roster spot.
Right, so that's where I'm kind of talking about. So bring it back to just a guy I was just talking about, Deontay Johnson, because I have both of their schedules up right now. Week 1, Deontay Johnson against the Giants or Deshaun Jackson against Washington?
It's Deontay for me.
I didn't think that was a question for you, but
well, I mean, those are both it's because those are both good matchups, and Deontay is more of a question mark receiver than some other receivers. But in 2+ matchups for those guys, it's Deontay for me.
I will take Deshaun there.
All right, at least he's sticking to his guns.
Okay.
We'll wait for that for our first DFS show, where you better be in there.
I'm slotting in Deshaun Jackson.
Give me that money.
We should just do a nice little one-on-one. You guys have to start. You have to start Deontay.
I'll 100% do that. It's on. For my last guy, I'm going with a slightly better wide receiver, more in the line of Deontay Johnson as to where he's being drafted. And honestly, a guy who was barely qualified for this segment because he's being drafted at 98.5, which, if you're clocking that at home, is 9.05 or 9.1 because you can't draft at 05. But Brandin Cooks, who, for those of you who've been listening since May, this may sound familiar, and that's because it's been almost exactly a month since I've shouted from the rooftops about Brandin Cooks. In that month, his value has dropped. He's actually gone from 90.5 to 98.5. So somehow in a month, this guy has fallen in ADP because fantasy owners are having strokes. I don't know. I don't know what's causing him to fall. But anyway, I figure it's time for me to get my sandwich board out of the garage, throw that thing over my shoulders and march on down to the beach and shout at people like a crazy person about Brandin Cooks. So here we go. Take 2, Brandin Cooks. He has been a model of consistency over his 6-year career. I mean, he didn't do great in his first year, but a lot of rookies don't. He had a fine rookie year. After that, 129 targets, 84 receptions, 1,138 yards, and 9 touchdowns. 117 targets, 78 receptions, 1,173 yards, 8 touchdowns. 114 targets, 65 receptions, 1082 on the yardage, and 7 touchdowns. And then 117 targets, 80 receptions, 1,204 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Last season wasn't great, but it was derailed due to concussions. He did only miss 2 games last year. His play was just off, as to be expected from someone who gets 3 concussions in 1 year. He was playing with a brain made of oatmeal. Since then, he's been traded from the Rams to the Texans. He's come out and said that his concussions, shouldn't be a reoccurring issue, which, I'll take him at his word for it. They weren't really a reoccurring issue before last year, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt for now. And he also goes to a team that just lost DeAndre Hopkins, so they vacated a ton of targets, and their other top option is Will Fuller, who, like the aforementioned Deshaun Jackson, plays about 3 plays a year before he tears his hammy and goes on the IR. So I don't really see what there isn't to not like, or what there isn't to like about this guy. I mean, he's a guy who's consistently gone out. I mean, his worst year was 1,082 yards and 7 touchdowns. That was the Patriots with Tom Brady, who reportedly has a very difficult system to learn for incoming wide receivers and doesn't go deep that often. And he still put up a very good year for a guy fresh into the Patriots system. I mean, I feel like people are just actively avoiding this guy now. They have their Brandin Cooks blinders on, and they're just looking ahead, just la 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 la, nothing to see here. I'll just go take my boring Will Fullers and Austin Hoopers and all the other garbage that's going in that range instead of taking a guy who could legitimately win them. Like, this is a guy who gives you so much roster freedom if you take him where he's going. He's a guy who could put up top 15 wide receiver numbers, and you're getting him in the 9th round. Like, think about what that allows you to do at those other draft positions if you can grab the guy. Maybe you go early on him because you get a little crazy with your early picks. You go running back, wide receiver Patrick Mahomes, and then running back, wide receiver Brandin Cooks.
Awesome.
All of a sudden, you've got a crazy good team, and you were able to get that because the fantasy community as a whole is just doing an ostrich impersonation, just sticking their head in the sand, like just pretending that Brandin Cooks doesn't exist because he had one down year. Like, I know we're a "what have you done for me lately" crowd, but this is taking it to the extreme.
I just like to think it's one. Will Fuller is gaining that hotness. Is just maybe he's that new just boom guy and could be the number one. I do see the risk with him. It's clear, but maybe it's just the Randall Cobb hype. I mean, I talked about him 2 weeks ago, and he's a legitimate guy. He could be the last man standing if Brandin Cooks is sitting there with soup in his brains and Will Fuller's got no leg. But
I actually don't hate Randall Cobb. I do agree. It's like he is a nice pick if you think that both Will Fuller and Brandin Cooks are going to, be sitting on the sidelines in various casts.
Yeah, I will say Brandin Cooks. I am on Team Cooks here. I think that him and Randall Cobb are a big reason of why I'm more up on Watson than I was at the beginning of the show.
You strike me more of a Fuller guy.
No.
Is it because he likes injured field stretchers?
No, he likes the high boomer bust guys, a la AJ Brown.
Well, Fuller's not old enough for him.
Yeah, he's going to have at least 13 seasons in the league.
Frankie only drafts field stretchers over the age of 30.
And AJ Brown.
If you're still in the prime of your career, you're too young.
But yeah, Brandon Cooks' consistency, you can't really argue with any of that.
I agree. I probably have the strongest opinion on him out of any of the guys I've mentioned across our 3 episodes so far. He feels to me like a guy who there's a big disparity between like industry pundits and the casual fan at home. If you're someone listening to this show, if you can take away one thing from everything I've preached about over the last couple of months, it's don't draft Deshaun Jackson. No, it's draft Brandin Cooks, take him around early if you have to, because even in the 8th round, it's still a value. 7th round, still a value for the type of production he can return and the guy he has under center. It's taking money. It's free money. It's taking candy from your league mates.
Vitaly, this seems very familiar.
I mean, that's what you're looking for in the late rounds. You're looking for these guys who have a route to being a starter for you that can let you take an early tight end or take an early quarterback, or just where you can take a more questionable player that could get injured earlier in your draft, and then you have this guy who could bloom, and then now you either have a trade chip or you have someone to fill in a roster spot you just lost. As somebody who's lately, as you know full well with the captain of the injury bug and me who has been catching it lately, injuries are going to happen. They're going to happen, especially this year. We've already seen a lot of defensive players. You don't want to see anyone go down, but luckily it's mostly been on the defensive side with the safety for the Browns going down today for the season. We're going to see a lot of soft tissue injuries going into this year because of the lack of ramp-up time. And this year you got to draft for safety and being ready to get that next man up. So Brandin Cooks, Deontay Johnson, Deshaun Jackson to a lesser extent, these are the kind of guys you want to look at at the end of your draft instead of just grabbing, this is where you can go contrary and say, hey, I want to go early quarterback so I don't waste my late picks on quarterbacks and tight ends where I'm going to need depth pieces.
I agree. All right. I don't have any further counterpoints. So Unless you guys have any final thoughts on that grouping of players, I think it's time for a beer check. I just poured 3, so I'm like a sip into 3.
So I think that it's you again.
Me again? But I just ranted about Brandin Cooks. Keep the rant going! I actually don't have anything that's really grinding my gears this week. I know Vitali hasn't got a ton of rant times. I think I'll cede my rant to Vitali, as I've got a couple rants in a row. I'm kind of out of ranting stuff.
Yeah, I haven't ranted in a bit, but I feel like I just kind of just get it out myself. But if I've got to rant about one thing when it comes to the fantasy community, it is that the kicker and the defense still exist in regular teams. Our league has been a poison about this, and has made me want to put forks in my eyes. Because they're always the last one on the train for some reason. As I talked about, hey, guys, let's use points for to decide tiebreakers instead of head-to-head matchup, because you might verse that guy who randomly starts Brandin Cooks and Deshaun Jackson, who both come out for 40 points. And they were like, oh, yeah, I guess I was actually supposed to put in David Johnson. I put in D-Jax for some reason. And now you're out of the playoffs because that one person beat you, as opposed to you putting up week-to-week great fantasy performances, but not getting the job done enough to make the playoffs. So going back to the kicker thing, though, kicker is just such a volatile position. Whenever I argue it, I always say, if this position matters, if it's something you want to keep in the league, why are we only ever drafting it in rounds 13, 14, and 15, usually your last 3 rounds? I mean, Justin Tucker, who's a guy, if you're playing standard scoring, where you can get those 5-point long bomb touchdown kicks, can get you a win in a week where he can drop 20 to 25 points just because he kicks 3 or 4 field goals from 50 yards plus. But yet still no one's saying, hey, take him in the 9th, 8th, because he can really lock down some points for you. Or a defense where we saw Bears Pats last year, they would dominate, and they were one of the best fantasy assets yet this year. And they're not saying, hey, go get those Pats in the 8th round. No, it's still take them in the 10th because they have no value because you can't predict it. I mean, the Titans were one of the best defenses last year. The Chiefs all of a sudden became one of the best defenses last year. So it's just, that's one thing I love about Underdog and some of the new fantasy sites that are coming around. They're getting on the wave of, we play fantasy to project what the offense does, not what the kicker who you have to project, all right, is this team good enough to get close but not score? Because then I only get 1 point, but they got to be bad enough to get a 40-yarder. But how many yards back is that? That's 17. So now that's actually a 50-yarder, and you're doing all this extrapolation, and that's why they're just like, I don't know, this kicker should do well this year, so draft him, I guess. So I mean, in summation, I think every league should just get rid of the kicker and soon the defense.
Defense, I'm not on board with. Just it is a little more predictable in season. It's hard to predict going into the year, but yeah, kickers garbage before the year. Kickers garbage in year. No one's ever happy to draft kickers. No one's ever happy to have kickers. And if you're a guy losing to a kicker when he goes off, you're just like, I'm gonna mail a bag of poop to this kicker's house.
Yeah, as guys who've played a lot of fantasy football, when was the last time you traded for a kicker?
Oh, never.
Yeah.
No, actually, I'm sorry. That's a lie.
Oh.
Me and my brother traded kickers this last year, but it was mostly just to meme.
Our league, if you're watching, you better be watching.
My brother and I were just kind of like trading kickers to show how useless kickers were, that we just swapped kickers for a week. I actually didn't start a kicker in most of my matchups last year.
So as I was
Came in 4th.
as I was trying to say, our league, if you're watching, let's just kill the kicker. Let's just be done with it. Let's cut our ties.
We can make that plea in person. All right. Well, that'll do it for us today. We'll join you guys later this week with with another one of our mock draft episodes where I have to dethrone Frankie or he wins.
So this is naturally the week I win.
I mean, oh yeah, true. Actually, if you win, it still doesn't matter. Yeah.
One more.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna DDoS Frankie this week, and we'll go from there. All right. See you guys later this week.